We're continuing our series, looking at Ephesians. We've been in Ephesians for quite a long time now, and I hope that you've already been blessed by it. If you cast your memories back quite a long way, you'll remember that I made it clear, I hope, that the first three chapters, and we spent quite a bit of time in those first three chapters, in those first three chapters, we're not told to do anything. It's just telling us about what God has done, about his greatness, about his mercy towards us, about what we have done, not what we should do, and the mess that we're in, but his grace upon us and what he has done. That's the first three chapters. And then the second three chapters is all Paul telling us what to do. And the problem is, when you spend a long time unpacking the scriptures, is we can forget that what we're to do is in light of what God has done. What we're to do is in light of God, who God is. And Paul's been speaking about who God is and what we're to do in the light of that. And if we disconnect the commands of God to go and do various things from the wonder of who he is and what he has done, we just become a bunch of legalists. Or people that are driven, I've got to do this and I've got to do that. Rather than being people that are filled with praise and who are keen and eager to do what God wants us to do. You know, so when Paul wrote this passage that we're about to look at, Paul envisaged a people who were so filled with praise that they're like, God, I'll do anything. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. That's the state of heart that Paul assumes when he writes this. And so this morning what we're going to do is we're going to look primarily at verse 21, or not look at verse 21, but work out what that means. And we're going to spend the first or third of the message looking at that. The second, we're going to look at what it does not mean for a wife to submit to her husband. When we think about husbands and wives, what it doesn't mean, and a bit about what it does at the end. Okay, and that's why we're going to spend some more time on it next time I preach. But it begins, verse 21, these are the first words that we need to take note of. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Okay? So Paul is beginning a new passage, a new idea that he's going to convey to us. And it's all about our relationships. Okay? So he begins, he says, submit to one another, and then about husbands and wives. This is how you're to relate. And then he talks about children and parents, and then employers and employees, or slave masters and slaves. And in other passages of Scripture where Paul speaks about similar things, he includes that we should submit to all the governing institutions and authorities. And basically what he's saying is that in all of our relationships with one another, between a husband and wife, within the church, so you've got elders and the congregation and members of the church, in all areas of life, in our relationship with our friends, with neighbours, with authorities, there is a godly order. Now remember those two words, godly order. There is a right way of relating in all those spheres. Okay? And this morning, and he begins by saying, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now at the moment he's writing to the church and speaking to people within the church. He's saying, you guys, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now he doesn't mean, or it's not, if we take that at face value, we would never get anything done. We'd be like, Michael, would you lead? No, Julian, you lead. No, you lead. No, you lead. No, I want to submit to you. No, I want to submit to you. And we're all submitting to another. No one gets anything done, right? Okay? It doesn't mean that. Yeah, we all just submit to one another so that nothing gets done. It immediately becomes clear what he means as he starts to work out what does it mean to submit to one another. Here's how God wants us to do it. Okay? And then he gets on to husbands and wives and families, parents and children, etc. So, but he begins with those words, submit to one another. And here's the reason why. Okay, if you think about the opposite to submitting to one another, well, the opposite would be power grabbing and trying to overrule one another, right? And if I've got a bunch of people with me, and they're all like, yeah, we'll submit to one another, I can work with that, right? We can get stuff done because they'll be submissive and we can do stuff and things will be hunky-dory, there'll be harmony. But if I've got a bunch of people and they all want to be chiefs, we've got a fight on our hands, we've got a battle on our hands, right? You can all see that, can't you? And so Paul says, submit to one another. And in those words, he undercuts all of our natural inclination. You see, if we go all the way back, right way back to the beginning, to Genesis chapter 3, we can see, can't we, that Adam and Eve, the first human couple, what was their sin? Well, you can cut the cake in different ways, but it's quite legitimate to say that their sin was a power grab, right? They wanted to be in charge. God had said, you must, etc. And they're like, but we want to do what we want to do. We want to be top dog. And so it was, among other things, a power grab. It was, remember those words I mentioned earlier, godly order. It was a disruption of God's godly order. They were meant to submit to God and obey Him. But they disrupted that. And that is what sin is. Sin is disrupting God's godly order. You can think of sin in that way. You see, there was a power grab. They stopped believing that God knew what was best for them. And they thought that they knew what was better for themselves. They thought they would be better off doing things their way rather than God's way. Yeah, you can see all of that right there in Genesis. So it was a power grab. Now the thing is, if you got it there, you can have a look at it. Genesis chapter 3. This is when they're being tempted in the first place. This is what it says, verse 7. Verse chapter 3 and verse 6. Look at what it says. When the woman, look at what it says, the next word, saw. When the woman saw the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gathering wisdom, she took some and ate it. Yeah, this is how sin always works. It always looks pleasing to the eye, doesn't it? Always. You look at it, it's desirable. Always. It's always the way that sin is. Okay? And the experience of it is usually enjoyable. So she actually saw it, it looked appealing and desirable, and she took it and she ate. Obviously she enjoyed it because she gave it to us. She didn't spit it out, oh that's horrible, don't touch it, and she have some of it. This is good. She enjoyed it. But then what happens in verse 7, the very next thing, then the eyes of both of them were opened and they realised they were naked. This is how sin works. It's pleasing to the eye, desirable, enjoyable at the time. It's sweet to the taste, bitter to the belly. Every time, isn't it? It usually doesn't take long to realise, oh, why did I do that? Why? It's right there. They disrupted God's order. It seemed better to do that. But they quickly found out that it didn't. It was a power grab. And there's a couple of things that we want to notice. As soon as they sinned, it says they realised that they were naked. In other words, they saw one another with corrupt eyes now. Corruption. They were corrupt. God's order has been disrupted. Things have fallen apart. They hear the sound of God in the garden. Actually, before we go on to that, the first thing they did is they saw they were naked, and so they sewed fig leaves together. They're trying to hide themselves from one another because of shame and guilt and all those things. And then the next thing is they hear the sound of God in the garden, His presence, and they hide from His presence. This is where their sin that looks so appealing gets them. hiding from one another, feelings of guilt, and now wanting to get away from the God that they once loved to be with and enjoyed fellowship with him and enjoyed his pleasure upon them. They loved that, and now they're hiding from him, trying to get away from him. God calls them to account, and what do? He blames her, she blames the serpent, and they're blaming one another. Sin always ruins. It left their relationships, all of them, in tatters. Their relationship with God, their relationship with one another was ruined. They were now ridden with guilt and insecurity and fear and shame, and that clear conscience that they once enjoyed has been tarnished. That is what sin does. Now, remember though, they disrupted God's order. This is what it led to. Now, I've got to say one other thing about sin, about the nature of sin, okay, and evil, that we need to know. Satan, who's the one that tempted them, he cannot create anything, okay? He didn't even create a mess. Adam and Eve didn't create a mess. You can't really call it a creation. God creates. God's given us creative power, but sin and evil never creates. Sin and evil, here's a word for you, you don't need to necessarily remember this, I'll explain what it means. It's a privation. Okay, what that means is it's an absence of something. Sin is an absence of God's godly order. Okay, in other words, they didn't create this messed up relationship. This messed up relationship is just what you're left with when God's order is not in place. Let me illustrate it like this. It's a bit like light and darkness. Darkness is not a thing. You don't make darkness. You create. Light is something that you make. Light is a thing. How do you get darkness? Just an absence of light. It's always there. You take the light away, you've got darkness. You don't have to do anything. You don't create it. It's just there. And evil and sin is like that. So if you think of it like this, imagine you've got a nice TV. Satan comes and breaks the corner off the TV doesn't work anymore. Okay? That's kind of like sin. It just takes away so that things don't work properly anymore. And by taking something away, he's just destroying. He's not creating it. He didn't create a mess. He's just ruined what was good. Right? And that is what sin does. It always does that. That's what Satan does. He cannot create anything. That's why Jesus said of Satan, he said the thief, he calls him. You notice that? Why? Because he takes away. The thief comes only to kill, steal, and destroy. How does he do that? By ruining, by breaking things up, by ruining the good that God established. And so, he ruined the relationship between the husband and the wife. I don't know if you'll have noticed that God created Adam first. Adam names Eve twice. He calls her woman and then names her Eve. These are signals that Adam is in charge. Okay, and we don't like those terms, but that is what it signals. Adam was meant to be in charge. He was meant to be the leader as well. But when it came to the temptation, who led? The woman. Disruption of God's order. And who followed? The man. Disruption of God's order. And that disruption, what God does, when we sin and when we persist in sin, then we can experience on top of all that his judgment. His judgment follows our sin. Okay? And in Romans chapter 1, God explains how his judgment works. And here's how it works. God hands us over to our sin. So it's like we want God, Adam and Eve, they wanted to sin, so God hands them over to their sin. So if you look at Genesis chapter 3 and verse 16, to the woman he said, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labour you will give birth to children. And then look what it says. Your desire will be for your husband, but he will rule over you. Okay, you may have a slightly different translation there, but let me explain what that means. Okay, so this is God's judgment now. That they've disrupted things. They wanted to be in charge, and they've fought. They've done this power grab. Okay, and now God says to the woman, your desire will be, this is his judgment, will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. The word desire there, it's not an easy one to translate. But here's what it means. The Hebrew word behind it only appears in one other place in all Hebrew literature. So if you won't find the word anywhere outside of the Bible in any Hebrew literature, it's just not there. And you find it in only one other place in the Bible. And that is in Genesis chapter 4. And in Genesis chapter 4, God warns Cain and Abel, warns Cain. And he says to Cain, sin is crouching at your door. It, and this is where the word appears, desires to master you or to have you. In other words, and I think providentially God's given us that so that we can interpret this first verse. When it says a woman will desire her husband, it's not, she finds him desirable. Her desire is to control. That's the natural, sinful response of a woman to her husband. A desire to get control of. And it's a kind of leadership, but it's a corrupt version. It's a corrupt version. And it's sinful. But then he says, your desire will be for your husband, but he will rule over you. Now, Paul, when he writes about husbands and being the head of the family, he doesn't use the word rule. This is like a forced rule. In other words, God is saying, okay, you wanted to be top dog, now you're going to both fight over it. This is your judgment. This is what you wanted. You both wanted to be top dog. And so what he's doing is he's telling them that from now on there's going to be this struggle, this battle between husband and wife, and by extension, man and woman, generally speaking. You know, you see it worked out through all of history. The battle of the sexes. Men continually suppressing women. Women trying to find ways of getting the upper hand. If you think about the feminist movement, it's not really a neutral movement. It's not just equality, often, that they want. Something, but often it's more than equality. They don't. They want. There's a desire for control and dominance there. They never admit it, but it's true. Unless, of course, they get completely wrong and they're not sinful anymore. It's true of them. It's true of us. But a husband's tendency is to suppress and rule harshly, and a woman's tendency is often to try and manipulate and control and find ways of, leading. This is the nature of sin. God hands us over to our sin, and that's what he did in the garden. So, it's no surprise then that God, when he starts to address our relationships in the church, begins with those words, submit to one another. Yeah, he's been talking about all that God has done in Ephesians chapters 1, 2 and 3, and how God has not only redeemed us, but he has given us his Holy Spirit, so that in the church we can begin to live the way that we were meant to in the first place. He's given us his Spirit to do that. So now we have his Spirit, we have his power at work in us, so that we can, and here he instructs us. So here's the first thing, this power struggle. Got to stop. Submit to one another. And this is God beginning to restore godly order. Revelation 21, this is a look forward to Jesus when he's come back and he's finally established his kingdom. It says, then I saw a new heavens and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth, that's this, have passed away, and the sea was no more. And I heard a voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. Harmony established again. Remember, they rejected God in the garden, but now God will be their God, and he will be their people. He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. There shall be neither mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore. Here's why: for the former things have passed away. And among the former things is this struggle between husband and wife, between man and woman. That's part of the former things that are going to pass when King Jesus finally establishes his kingdom. But right now, those things haven't passed, and that's why we all struggle. If we're honest, we all know what this battle's about. We struggle, but we don't have to give in to it. We are to submit to one another. One of the biggest challenges for us is accepting God's word in this. It so goes against our nature. So goes against our nature. Because of all sorts of very often legitimate fears and concerns. But we are told very clearly, submit to one another, and here's the reason why. Not because everyone else is worthy, but out of reverence for Christ. That's what it says. In other words, if you revere and honour Christ, you will be a person who submits. Maybe you struggle with it, but you will do it for him. It might not be natural for you or easy. For some of you, it will be more natural and easy. But because you revere Christ, you submit. Adam and Eve, they stopped revering Christ. They stopped revering God, and they rebelled. Right? Out of reverence for Christ, submit to one another. And then he says, wives, submit to your husbands. Now, I did a word study, and I've got it. If you want it, you can have it, on quite a lot of parts from this passage. And I looked at all the different occurrences of submit and subject. Subject yourselves to. Often it says it's exactly the same Greek word. And do you know what? It just means what you might think it means. It just means submit. It just means. Okay, I've got some meanings here. And they're absolutely right. Oh no, they're in my other notes. But it means to submit to or yield to the will of another. That's what it means. To submit to or yield to the will of another. Wives, submit to your husbands. Yield to their will. Don't fight them. Don't resist them. That's what it means. This is why we're going to look at what it doesn't mean as well. You'll be glad when we come to that bit. But it's just important that we are clear that we get the chalk marks right. Now, chalk marks, I was told this, I don't really know anything about acting, but if you're an actor on a stage, what they used to do at least is they'd have chalk marks in various places on the stage. And at various parts of the play, you would have to be on your mark. And as long as everyone was on their mark, everything works perfectly well. Okay? And this is like, God has given us chalk marks. And we've got to be clear where those chalk marks are to begin with. Then we can start working out the problems that it might seem to cause. But the chalk marks are this. Wives, submit to your husbands. Now that means this. A wife who is unwilling to submit to her husband is in rebellion also against God. Now, let me underline the word. A wife who is unwilling to submit to her husband. Anyone says, I will never submit to that person. That's just rebellion. Now, it might be, and we'll look at this a little bit more in a few moments, but it might be that there's good reason actually to not submit to this person. But it would be more humble to say, I cannot submit to that person now, but out of reverence for you, Lord, if you want me to, then I will. You know, it's a humility. Without humility, we cannot submit to one another. That's why it says in Ephesians 4, chapter 2, be completely humble. You see how important it is. If a wife is unwilling to submit to her husband, And if a husband gives in to his wife, both of them are sinning. The husband for being like Adam, and the wife for being like Eve. Both are sinning. So, in the family, a husband is to be the head, and the wife is to submit. A husband is to love his wife, the wife is to respect her husband. So I want to just say a few things about what this does mean, okay? So, firstly, for a wife to submit to her husband does not mean that she agrees on everything with him, okay? So, in 1 Peter, it talks about a wife who's married to an unbeliever. She should submit to her husband still, right? But if her husband says, don't believe in God anymore, of course, she doesn't have to agree with him on that, or submit to him on that. So there are things. So there are things where a wife, does not have to submit to her husband. Okay. So it does not mean agreeing on everything, like the Christian faith. If you're married to an unbeliever, then you don't have to submit in that. It does not mean that you compromise God's moral laws or rules or standards or statutes, whatever you want to call them. If your husband is wanting you to do something that creates a crisis of conscience between you and God, and you feel it's disobeying God, then you do not submit to your husband. It does not mean disobeying God. Here's the reason why. Your husband is your head. Jesus is your Lord. He is the sovereign Lord. And your husband is not. Okay? As sovereign Lord, he says, submit to your husbands. Now, you can submit to your husband without obeying him. And you can submit to your husband, or be submissive at least, without agreeing with him. The wife who's married to an unbeliever, who's telling her to give up her faith, can say to her husband, I really want to submit to you and be submissive towards you. I really do. But I cannot obey Jesus my Lord, and I'm sorry. I cannot submit to you on that. You see, she's got a submissive heart, a submissive attitude still, as she says to him, I cannot do that. Why? Because she's submissive to her Lord Jesus. So you don't compromise God's moral laws. We saw that last week on the two greatest commands. To love the Lord your God with your heart and to love your neighbour as yourself. And so many times we see, at least a good number of times, God's legal, technical, ritualistic laws being compromised. David ate the manna out of the ark, for example. That can be compromised. What we mustn't compromise is our love for God and one another, and what that means. Okay, the third thing, it does not mean, ladies, that you stop thinking, that you don't use your brains. And men, husbands, it doesn't mean that you have the right to say, I'll do the thinking round here, leave that to me. Husbands need to recognise, and men need to recognise, that God created women as thinking, intelligent creatures, beings. And so, we husbands need to listen to them as such. Submission does not mean avoiding effort to... By the way, I got some of these from John Piper, I just want to acknowledge that. Okay? Submission does not mean avoiding effort to influence or change your husband. Now, I'll say that carefully. If your husband is in sin and you have no desire to want to see that change, and you have no desire to want to see that change, there's something wrong with you, basically. If you're a believer and your husband isn't, you should want him to become a believer. And you should want to influence him. It says, doesn't it, again in 1 Peter, by your godly life, to influence him. You might win him. Okay? So it doesn't mean wives stop thinking. I learned yesterday that in Saudi Arabia, women have finally been allowed to drive cars. You see, the kind of submission in Islam is the kind of submission where a woman has to submit on every tiny detail, whatever the husband says. That is not Christian submission. Okay? Women can drive. Permission granted. It does not mean a woman getting her spiritual strength from her husband. Again, a believing wife must submit to her unbelieving husband. She doesn't get any spiritual strength from her husband. Okay? It does not mean that the husband is better at leading than the wife.
Yeah.
There are plenty of women who are married to their husbands, and if the husband is honest, their wives are much better at loads more things than them. It's just a fact. It's not always true, but there are some people it's like, look, my wife is better at everything pretty much than me. And it's true. Okay, so husbands being head doesn't mean that they're better, and husbands, we need to realise that. The wife, she may be better at managing the finance and the general management, she may be better at theology, she may be better at fixing things, she may be better at teaching the children, at disciplining the children, she may earn more, all of those things, that's all possible. But, so it doesn't mean that she's less in any of those ways. Listen, husbands having headship has nothing at all to do with competency. Nothing to do with competency. For those husbands who are very highly incompetent, and there are some, we hope God's given them wives who are competent. So, and now a word for husbands, okay? Though all that applies to for your wives, that you don't, submission doesn't do those things. For a husband, okay, even the most incompetent can be a good head of his family. Okay, so here's how. If you're a husband, you can say, wifey, let's make sure we daily have devotions. That doesn't require competence, does it? To say that. You can say, children, come on, we're going to read the Bible together. Husband can do that. Quite capable. Husband can say, right, let's go out for the day. Can do that. A husband can say to his wife, come on, darling, we need to, let's work on our finances. Right? If you think of headship like this, headship is about a man taking initiative. And he may not be able to, he may not be a great theologian. If you're there and you've got the kids and the wife, it's like you can say to the kids, look, read that passage of scripture. Or is there a passage of scripture that you like? Or I've been reading this, let's all read this together. You can just do that, it's easy, right? Then you can say to your wife who's a theologian, what do you think of that passage? You can ask it. And you can ask the children. And you can work it out together. Same with finance. If your finance is in a mess, you can work together. If you're not good at that stuff, use the gifts. I don't mean, in a kind of utilitarian way, but use the gifts that God's given you together. You're one. Right? So you work together. Out of 100 times, how many times do you husbands say, let's do this or that? Okay, if your wife is saying that more than you, then you're not the head of your family. Simple as that. You're not taking initiative. And wives, if you're doing it more than your husbands, then you are the head of your family. And so you need to put that right. I'm guessing we've all got some work to do. There's more to say. I don't want you to go away from here and think, right, we're going to go and do this. There's a bit more for you to hear. We're not going to hear it all this morning. But I just want to say one more thing to husbands. I'm not going to say anything about it, but it said, two things actually. It says, to wives, submit to your husbands in everything, right? That word everything, it doesn't mean saying every detail or every single thing he says. It means there shouldn't be any area of your life where you're not willing to submit to your husband. That's what it means. Rather than if he says it's got to be pink wallpaper, that's it, it's got to be pink. If he says the grass has got to be cut this day, that's it, it's got to be cut. If he says you've got to take your feet off the chair, you've got to take your feet off the chair. If he says it's time for you to go to bed, no, it doesn't mean that in everything in that way. It means in all areas of your lives, be submissive to your husband, be willing to submit to him. Okay? And then husbands, your main purpose in your headship, in your family, is wives submit to your husbands as the church does to Christ. Okay? So there's a parallel there. Why is the church to submit to Christ? That Christ may make the church holy and blameless and pure, godly. And that is, husbands, your main headship responsibility. So although I said, don't go away saying do this and that, maybe you do need to go away and say, look, let's do one thing at least to your wife. Let's start reading the Bible together if you're not already doing that. That's something that you need to take responsibility for. And wives, when your husbands take initiative to try to lead, don't fight them. Don't resist.